The fifth door shut before the smallest child could finish saying please. Wren Calloway stood on the porch boards of the bar 7 with the wind worrying the hem of her father's coat and 4 pairs of eyes fixed on her mouth, waiting to see whether it would steady or break. Behind her, Micah held the grain sack with their clothes in it. June held Abel's hand so tightly the boy kept twisting his fingers free and losing them again. Little Ruth had her face pressed to the seam of Wren's skirt, and through the cloth Wren could feel the child's breath come hot and quick, the way it did before tears, though Ruth had learned since Fort Laramie not to waste many. Inside the house a woman's voice said, low and not unkind, I'm sorry, truly, but we lost near half the herd 2 winters back, and my husband says. The door clicked. The latch dropped. That was all. It was the same click Wren had heard at the Slater place, the same at Circle H, the same at the big white house under the cottonwoods where the foreman had not even come out, but sent a Mexican cook with cold biscuits and a message that Mr. Marlowe did not hire children, did not loan credit, and did not want sickness carried onto his range. The biscuits were gone now. Ruth had cried over the last crumbs and June had licked the paper when she thought nobody saw. The sky over the Laramie Mountains had gone the color of dishwater, and the first dry snow came slanting out of it hard enough to sting. Somewhere below the bluff the North Platte moved black between its willows, not frozen yet but thinking about it. Wren was 17, old enough to know that 5 children with a dead father's watch, a wagon sheet, and a deed to 160 acres of alkali bench were not a family to most people. They were a winter with legs. Before we go one step farther into what happened on that bench, let me say I'm glad you're here tonight, wherever the lamp is burning. If you're shelling peas in Georgia, if the kettle's on in Yorkshire, if you're listening from a kitchen in Alberta or a porch in Queensland with the dark coming down outside, tell me where this story found you. It matters, somehow, knowing a voice travels farther than the wind off these mountains ever could. Wren turned from the bar 7 door and put her body between the snow and the littler ones. Eyes up, she said, because her father used to say it when the trail got steep, and because if they looked at her face they would know she had nothing left to offer except the next mile. Micah, 13 and trying to grow a man's anger before he had grown a man's shoulders, kicked a frozen clod off the porch. We got one more. We got Tobin Hale, June said, and then wished she hadn't, because Abel brightened and Ruth lifted her head, and hope was the cruelest ration of all to hand out when you were down to crumbs. Everybody in Red Butte knew Tobin Hale, if knowing meant the things people said while not meeting his eye. Half cowboy, half ghost. Rode rough stock before the big die-off. Came back from the winter of '86 with a limp and a silence and a wife buried under a stone he cut himself. Lived alone in a sodden log place called Moss Cup on the north bench where nobody else wanted land because the wind got there first and stayed late. Took day work when he could get it. Fixed harness. Doctored horses with hands so gentle men made jokes until their own mare foaled dead, and he brought the living one out of the straw by dawn. He ain't a ranch, Micah said. No, Wren answered. He's a door. The snow thickened as they left the bar 7 yard, and by the time they passed the schoolhouse, closed since Miss Eddie married and moved to Cheyenne, the ruts had begun to fill. Wren kept them off the main track where drifts made traps and led them along the fence line, counting posts by feel when the light went flat. Her father had taught her that snow erases the world for eyes, not for hands. A post every rod. Wires singing if the wind crossed it right. Cattle will drift with the storm until fence or coulee turns them. Children will sit down if you let them feel colder than they are. Tell about the cup, Ruth said against Wren's leg. Not now. You said when it snowed. Wren had said many things since the fever wagon left their parents under canvas near the Sweetwater, since the wagon master from Missouri counted heads and found 5 too many, since he gave Wren a paper with her father's signature and a note that said Calloway claim, in bench, spring, and told her the territory would sort it out. She had said things to keep 4 hearts moving. Some were even true. When it sticks, Wren said. Then I'll tell. Snow stuck to Ruth's eyelashes. It stuck to Abel's collar and June's braid and the burlap around their shoes. It stuck to the black watch chain in Wren's pocket where her father's watch ticked on, wrong by 7 minutes, because she could not bear to open the back and set it against a station clock that did not care. Moss Cup appeared the way small mercies do in hard country, all at once and barely enough. A low roof shouldered into the bench, A sod wall grassed over on the north side. One window glowing dull orange behind greased paper. No barn to speak of, only a lean-to where a gray mule stood hipshot and mournful. Smoke leaned sideways from the stovepipe and was torn away. The door was raw pine, grayed by weather, with a horseshoe nailed above it points down, not for luck, Wren would learn, but because Elise Hale had hated the superstition and Tobin had hated taking down anything she touched. Wren lifted her fist. Before she knocked, the door opened. He filled it without seeming large. A man made of rope ends and old weather, beard going iron at the chin, one shoulder lower than the other, eyes pale enough to look almost blind until they settled on you, and you felt counted to the bone. He took in Wren first, then the four behind her, then the snow caked on their shoes, and the empty grain sack, and the way Abel was shivering so hard his teeth clicked like dice in a cup. Every ranch shut you out, Tobin Hale said. It was not a question. Wren's chin came up. They were polite about it. His mouth moved, not a smile. Polite, don't cook beans. He stepped back into the heat and the smell of coffee and old leather and sage smoke. Bring them in before the little one turns blue. Ruth went first because Ruth always went where warmth was. Abel followed, then June, then Micah with the wary stiffness of a dog that has been kicked by boots he thought were friendly. Wren came last and stopped on the threshold, because crossing it felt like the end of a road she had promised her father she would keep them on, and she had not prepared words for the end. Tobin saw that too. He did not say come in again. He only reached past her, took the frozen latch string from her numb hand, and drew the door wide enough that there was no arguing with the size of the mercy. Inside was one room, clean and spare and poorer than the Bar 7 cook shed. A bed built into the wall with a patchwork quilt faded to the colors of weak tea. A table scarred by knives. A stove red at the seams. Pegs with tack, a shelf with 3 books, Bible, Pilgrim's Progress, and a veterinary manual stuffed with grass markers. And over the mantel, if a shelf of board could be called a mantel, a blue enamel cup with a chip at the rim and a wooden star no bigger than a biscuit, carved rough and hung on a nail by twine. Ruth went straight to the stove and held out her hands. Abel sat on the floor as if his bones had given notice. June's eyes moved over everything and stored it. For plates, 5 spoons, 1 cup chipped blue, 6 tin cups dull as pewter, not enough blankets, not enough anything, but fire enough to make the window weep. Tobin filled a pot without asking who was hungry. He set out bread hard as a brick and softened it in bacon grease. He gave Ruth the blue cup with milk cut half with hot water and watched her drink, as if he had forgotten until that moment that a child's hands around a cup could make a room change shape. Wren did not sit. We can work, she said. I can ride drag or swing a branding iron. Micah can throw a loop and clean stalls. June can mend better than most grown. Eat first, Tobin said. I'm asking for a place, not charity. That reached him. He turned from the stove with the coffee pot in his fist and studied her the way men study sky before a long ride. Charity is what folks call bread when they want the eating of it to shame somebody. I don't. Sit down, Miss Calloway. Your knees are knocking loud enough to scare my mule. She sat because Abel looked at her, and because the bread, once hot, was the best thing she had tasted since her mother's hands were warm. The children ate like animals and tried not to. Ruth finished and licked the blue cup and then, horrified at herself, hid it under her skirt. Tobin took it gently, refilled it, set it back in her lap. Outside the snow found its voice. The window paper rattled. The mule stamped once in the lean-to and was still. When the pot was empty and the bread was gone down to the last burnt edge, Tobin told them the law of his house in few words. Little ones on the bed tonight. Big ones by the stove, boots off before blankets. Nobody touches the carved star. Nobody lies about being warm. In the morning he would ride to Red Butte and see what could be done that was honest. Honest ain't been doing much, Micah said, and flushed because he had not meant to say it aloud. Tobin only nodded. No, it usually waits till nobody's watching and then asks if you're still there. That was the first line Wren carried away in her pocket, though she did not know yet that she would spend the winter learning what it cost. Morning came white and hard. The snow had drifted over the doorstep, and Tobin opened the door with his shoulder, letting in a slab of light, so clean it hurt. Red Butte lay 2 miles east in the cottonwood bottoms. Mercantile, land office, church with no regular preacher, Assay office that assayed mostly hope, stockyard pens empty till spring. Tobin saddled the gray mule because his gelding had a cough, tied a sack behind the cantle, and told Wren the pump handle froze if you were foolish and the stove drew crooked if the wind came northwest. "You're leaving us," Ruth said, stricken. "I'm coming back," he answered, and the words had a weight that made even Micah look up. He was gone most of the day. Wren used the hours like coin. She melted snow and washed Ruth's hair by the stove, picked lice with a fine comb June found in Elise Hale's sewing box, aired blankets, patched Abel's shoe with saddle felt and sinew, counted Tobin's stores without being asked, flour low, beans enough for a careful month if no grown man ate like a man, coffee more prayer than drink, bacon gone to rind, a quarter of venison hanging frozen in the sod cellar, 3 horses' worth of oats, and only 1 mule to eat them. On the shelf behind the veterinary book, she found a tin box with papers inside and did not open it, because some doors are not yours even when you are freezing. She found something else by accident, hunting twine in the bench drawer, a small flannel bundle that came undone in her hand. Inside lay a baby's cap no longer than her palm, yellowed, stitched with blue thread so fine the stitches were almost invisible. Wren folded it back with shaking fingers and shut the drawer before June saw. All day after, the cap sat in her mind like a coal under ash. Tobin returned after dark with half a sack of cornmeal, a bottle of laudanum he put high on the shelf, and news worn down to the bone. The county had no poor farm this side of Laramie, and the circuit judge would not come till spring. The ladies' aid could take Ruth, maybe June, if separated from the boys. The Methodist widow in Omaha wrote letters about orphan trains, but Wren had seen one pass through Julesburg years before and remembered children standing on a platform, like calves at auction, while farmers squeezed arms and looked at teeth. Cress Marlowe, who held notes on half the homesteads on the North Bench and ran the stock association as if the brand laws were scripture and he were Moses, had let it be known that any outfit taking in the Calloway brats could expect no winter work and no spring contracts. "Every door," Tobin said, "takes orders from one that stays warm." Wren felt the room tilt. "He wants the claim." Tobin's eyes flicked to her, surprised and not. "Your father's spring is the only water on that bench that runs in a dry year. Marlowe fenced 3 sides of public range last summer and called it drift control. Come a hard winter, cattle crowd water. Come a dry summer, men crowd him. He don't need your 160 acres. He needs the seep and the right to say who drinks." June said softly, "Papa said a spring belongs to whoever keeps it clean." "Papas say true things," Tobin answered. "Then courts get hold of them." Micah stood so fast his cup fell. "Then we fight." "With what?" Wren snapped, sharper than she meant, and Ruth flinched. She hated herself, hated Marlowe, hated the whole polished machinery of being turned away gently by people who would call themselves Christian if the word paid interest. She went to the window, though there was nothing to see but black glass and her own face floating in it, older than 17, wearing her father's coat and her mother's mouth. Behind her, Tobin said to Micah, "Fighting's a crop. Plant it wrong, and it eats the field." The next days made a pattern out of nothing. Tobin rode to fence jobs and came home with frozen heels and once a side of elk from the Slater foreman, who paid in meat because Marlowe paid in threats. Wren took in mending from the mercantile, stitches so small the storekeeper's wife held a shirt to the window and accused her of using a machine hidden in the sod wall. June organized the little ones into lessons with a piece of charcoal and the back of a flour sack. A is for arm, B is for bread, C is for Calloway, which is ours. Micah learned Tobin's knots and cursed his thumbs. Abel made friends with the mule, whose name turned out to be Bishop because he was stubborn and long-eared and forgave slowly. There were nights Wren woke to find Tobin gone from his blanket and the door open a crack, cold moving over the floor like water. He would be outside in the dark with no coat, listening. Not for wolves. Wolves had reason. For the sound a blizzard makes before it is a blizzard, for the change in Wire's song, for the cough in the lean-to, for Ruth's breathing when fever walked in her sleep. He came back with snow in his beard and never said where he had been until the night Abel asked if he was looking for his boy. The room went so quiet the fire seemed loud. Tobin sat down slowly on the bench, and Wren saw his hand find the edge of the table and hold it, as men hold reins when the horse has already bolted. "No," he said at last. "I never got to look for him. He came early in a storm, and went before he had a name I was sure of. Elise wanted Joseph if it was a boy. I wanted Ross after my brother because Ross owed me $40 and I thought it would teach him. We were still arguing when he stopped. The carved star turned on its twine though no wind had come in. The doctor was in Medicine Bow with a broken axle. I saddled the fastest horse I had and rode into a ground blizzard because I believed fast could fix what late had started. Horse fell in a coulee. I crawled out with this. He touched his bad leg as if it belonged to someone he did not like. By the time I got back with help, Elise was cold, and the midwife had wrapped the little one in her shawl so I wouldn't see he'd never breathed. No one moved. Ruth, half asleep, made a small sound, and June put an arm around her. I dug 2 graves in ground like iron, Tobin said. People brought pie. Pie don't help, but you eat it because hands that made it need watching less than eyes. He looked at Abel then, not past him, not through him, and Wren understood that the man had answered because a child had asked, and because answering was a kind of walking back into the storm and opening a door. Abel considered this with the seriousness of 8 winters. Bishop gets lonely if the coyotes sing. I sing to him. Tobin's face did something that had forgotten how. That why my mule's spoiled. He likes him's wrong, Abel said. I only know the chorus. After that the little ones slept through more nights. The whether from Abel's crooked hymns or from the steadiness of being in a house where grief had a chair and did not rule the table, Wren could not say. Cress Marlowe came on the first clear day in December, riding a blood bay that cost more than Moss Cup and the claim together, with 2 men behind who stayed mounted because Marlowe liked witnesses who could not sit. He was not tall. Power rarely needs height when it has paper. He wore a beaver coat and a mustache combed to points and the smooth patience of a man who had never hurried because other people's hurrying made him rich. He did not dismount at first. He looked at the children's stockings drying by the stove through the open door, at the mended harness on the fence, at Wren with her hair pinned up and her father's watch chain crossing her vest like a small bright road. Miss Calloway, he said, you've grown into your mother's stubbornness. Wren had not known he knew her mother. The knowledge put a stone in her throat. Tobin came out wiping his hands on a rag and stood a little downhill, which should have made him smaller and did not. You're on my step, Cress. Association business. Marlowe smiled at the sky as if weather were a clerk. Winter contracts. I'm cutting riders who keep extra mouths. Nothing personal. It smelled personal at the land office. Marlowe's gaze came down. You hold a note on this place, Tobin. December 15th. I bought the paper from Hargrove before he drank himself dead, which was neighborly of me, considering what he'd have done with the money. Wren saw Tobin's jaw set. Moss Cup had a note. Of course it did. Poor men's roofs are built half of wood, half of owing. I pay my notes, Tobin said. You pay them when calves don't die and lungs don't bleed. I'm here about the spring. He took a folded paper from his coat and let it open in the wind, careful, as if unfolding a bird. The Calloway claim was mortgaged to my bank in August for seed and doctor bills. The note is due. These children are territory charges unless kin steps forward. I can be generous. I can keep the boys together with a family near Douglas, place the girls in respectable service, and give Miss Calloway a fair price for land no court will let her hold at 17. Ruth had come to the door without sound. She held the blue cup empty against her chest. Marlowe saw it, and something crossed his face too quick to name. Annoyance, memory, the irritation of a man reminded that the world contains small breakable things he cannot buy without looking foolish. Wren said, My father paid that note. Marlowe's eyebrows rose, delighted. Did he? In hides. October. He told Mr. Hargrove the tally was in his book. Hargrove's books are with his estate, which is with the court, which is with God. Considering the state he kept them in. Marlowe folded the paper. A child's memory against a due stamp makes poor law. A child, Wren said, and felt all 4 behind her lean closer to the word, as if to a fire, is what you call people when you plan to feed them less. One of the mounted men coughed into his glove to hide a laugh and failed. Marlowe did not turn, but the man found something urgent in the sky. Tobin stepped forward then, and the snow under his boot creaked like a floorboard in a church. You came to my house with papers and men. You'll leave with the same number of both. Marlowe regarded him. I heard you opened your door, Hale. I hoped it was grief gone soft. Now I see it's arithmetic. 5 children eat a note faster than winter does. He gathered his reins. December 15th. Spring or paper. Courts love paper. So do I. They watched him ride away, the bay's hooves throwing chips of ice that flashed and died. No one spoke until Ruth said, "He smells like the store when it's closed." After Marlowe came, the valley changed its weather around them. Not all at once. Cruelty in a small place is often just courtesy with the heat turned down. At the mercantile, Mrs. Vale still took Wren's mending but stopped offering tea. The school board sent word through a boy that if the Calloways wanted lessons, they could sit outside the window where the stovepipe warmed the wall. A man Wren had never met left a quarter of beef on Tobin's step in the night and took care to scuff his tracks near the road so no one could prove kindness. Mirabelle, who kept the boarding house and wore a thimble on a chain because she lost thimbles the way other women lost husbands, came with a sack of dried apples and stayed long enough to slap Tobin's hand when he tried to give her money. "You'll take apples and like it," she told him, thimble flashing as she pointed. "I buried 3 babies and a husband with a temper. If I want to feed noisy children that aren't mine, no banker-blooded rooster in a beaver coat is going to make my soup sinful." She looked at Wren then, eyes sharp as needles. "Can you bake bread that doesn't shame the pan?" "My mother could," Wren said. "That's not an answer." "Then I'll learn by morning." Mira sniffed, but her mouth softened. Mornings when most learning happens if the night didn't kill you. The harder choice came quietly, as the true ones do. On the 10th of December, a drummer from Cheyenne got snowed in at Myra's and sat by the stove telling fortunes from newspapers. The Burlington would push a spur north if grass held. Labor agents in Omaha paid fares for strong girls in service. A Children's Aid Society would ticket 5 orphans east, good homes guaranteed, brothers separated only temporarily being a word that had buried more families than cholera. He saw the Calloway brood and smelled story, offered Wren $40 for the human interest particulars, and grew offended when she asked whether $40 bought back for last names after they were changed by kind strangers. That same night, Tobin laid 2 papers on the table after the little ones slept. One was Marlowe's note on Moss Cup. The other was an offer from the Bar 7 foreman. Unofficial and signed, written in a hand that wanted not to know itself, for a top hand to winter at a line camp above the Sweetwater. Good wages, no questions, must report before the 15th, no dependents, no women, no children, no exceptions. Pays enough, Tobin said. Note gone. Spring held off maybe till court. You could take the drummer's tickets, all 5, ride out before Marlowe moves. I'd send money. You'd have letters. Wren looked at the papers until the words swam. The easy path wore such a clean face. She imagined a train car warm with coal heat, Ruth asleep with her head on a charitable lap, new shoes, school desks, people who had never seen the Sweetwater saying poor lambs and meaning it. She imagined Micah learning to answer to another man's name, and June sewing in a merchant's attic, and Abel forgetting Bishop's crooked hymns. She imagined Tobin alone in a line camp with the baby's cap in a drawer, and no child asking whether the dead get lonely. "What would you do," she asked, "if we were gone?" Tobin turned the blue cup on the table, a slow half-circle. "Probably make it through. And if we stayed? Probably don't." He said it without decoration. "Marlowe'll take the note, the claim, maybe the children if the judge rides his pocket. I can shoot a coyote and rope a steer. I can't fight paper with a rope." Wren picked up the unsigned offer. The paper was good quality. Easy choices often are. She fed it to the stove and watched the edge curl black before flame took it. "Then we don't fight paper with a rope," she said. "We find the book." Tobin looked at the stove, then at her, and for the first time since Fort Laramie, Wren saw a man choose her side without needing to be convinced it was his. "Hargrove's estate boxes went to his sister in Laramie," he said. "She's a Baptist and hates bankers. If a tally book exists, she kept it out of spite. Can we get there before the 15th? Not in this snow. But the stage runs if the driver's drunk enough, and Enoch is usually halfway. Here is where I have to stop the story for a breath, because I know some of you have already decided what you would do, and some of you are scolding Wren in your kitchens right now. Tell me true. When the safe road asks you to cut your family into pieces small enough to carry, is it still safe? Or is it just quieter about the bleeding? Hold that thought. The storm is coming, and storms in this country do not care what we intended. They sent June instead of Wren, because June at 11 had a face people forgot to guard against and a memory like a trap. Mira put her on the stage in a borrowed cloak with a pie for the driver and a letter to Hargrove's sister written in Tobin's cramped hand. If you hate Cress Marlowe more than you love dust, send what proves Ezra Calloway paid. June came back 3 days later blue with cold and triumphant, carrying a parcel wrapped in oilcloth and a Baptist kiss still drying on her cheek. Inside was Hargrove's tally book, smells of mice and rum, pages stuck where cheap whiskey had baptized them. October 1888. Ezra Calloway, 24 steer hides, fair winter weight, received on note. Signed EH with the little cross he made because he spelled Hargrove wrong when drunk. Beneath it, in a different ink and a smoother hand, a line had been added later. Hides condemned, fever. No initials. Tobin held the page to the lamp. Marlowe didn't forge Ezra's mark. He didn't need to. He just taught a dead book to lie after the fact. Wren felt something settle in her, cold and clear as spring water. The hides. If they were condemned, where are they? A hide doesn't vanish because ink says so. Association Warehouse, Micah breathed. Brands cured and bailed for spring freight, which Marlowe controls. Tobin closed the book softly, the way one closes a sickroom door. We get proof without getting shot, and we get it before the 15th. The 14th brought the storm. It came in the night the way the old-timers said the big one had come in '87. First a warmth false as a drunk friend, then a stillness so complete the owls stopped, then wind from the northwest with snow ground fine as glass. By dawn the world was the inside of a flour sack. Cattle on the open bench began to drift. Marlowe's great herd, wintered early on stolen grass and crowded toward the fenced seep he called a reservoir, moved before it like a dark river with too many banks. Tobin read it in the wire before full light. He'll lose 200 if they hit the North Coulee bunched. Maybe more if the fence turns them into the creek ice. Good, Micah said, and Wren let him have the word because some feelings deserve air before they poison the blood. It was Ruth who made the first sound after that, a thin cry from the bed that was not nightmare. June touched her forehead and went white. Fever, hot and fast, the kind that had taken their mother between one sunset and the next. Ruth's skin burned dry. Her lips cracked when Wren wet them. The blue cup shook in her hand so badly milk sheeted down her wrist. Tobin stood over the bed with his hat in his hands like a man at a grave. Laudanum won't break fever. Doctors in Red Butte if he ain't drunk at Myra's. If the stage can't run, Slay might on the river road. But Marlowe's herd is crossing the flat between here and town, and cattle in a ground blizzard will walk over a sleigh and never know. Wren heard the choice before he said it. Heard it in the careful way he did not look at the offer ashes in the stove or the note on the shelf. Stay with the dying child and let the proof wait. Ride for the doctor through a herd blind with panic. Go for Marlowe's book and leave Ruth to hands that had learned gentleness only yesterday. There was no good door. There was only which part of your heart you were willing to leave on the threshold. Abel, Wren said suddenly, because memory struck like flint. Where does Bishop go when coyotes sing? Abel, pale, answered at once. East wall. He hates west wind. Cattle too. Tobin said, catching it. They'll drift northwest till fence turns them. If Marlowe's men open the water gap to crowd the seep. The herd crosses the river road below the bend, Wren finished. Not on it. Her father's voice came back from a dusty noon. When snow takes sight, listen for what should be there and isn't. She took the watch from her pocket and pressed it into June's hand. 7 minutes fast, she said, though it was slow, because children need the error that keeps them brave. When the little hand stands where fear is highest, give Ruth the drops Mira left, 2 only, and sing Abel's hymn wrong till she laughs or sleeps. Micah, keep the stove fed but not roaring. Heat lies about doing good. Abel, she knelt and put her forehead to his. Bishop trusts you. If we bring the doctor and the sleigh bells spook him, you sing. Tobin was already at the pegs, taking down rope. You're not riding. I am. I've buried. I know what you buried. The words came out harder than she meant and truer too. That's why I'm riding. You read cattle. I read sign. My father's tally is in that warehouse, and his spring is under Marlowe's fence, and his daughter is done being polite at doors. They went into the white together. There are things a blizzard does to a body that have no dignity in them. It fills the nose with knives. It steals the up from the down. It makes the horse under you a rumor between your knees. Wren rode the gray gelding because he was quick when his cough left him alone. Tobin took Bishop because a mule that forgives slowly also gives up slowly, and the rope between their saddles hummed whenever one drifted from the other. They crossed the flat low, keeping fence wire on the right where its song meant not yet dead. Once a black shape loomed and became 3 steers walking backward into the wind, eyes rimmed white, snot frozen to their muzzles. Tobin lifted one hand. Easy, easy, and the steers swung as if the hand were weather. Wren felt, absurdly, like crying. The warehouse stood south of the stock pens, a long low skin of boards over a stone root cellar. No watchman, Marlowe trusted locks and fear. The lock was new and good, the hasp old and honest. Tobin's frozen fingers found the weak screw while Wren held her body between his hands and the wind. Inside, dark smelled of hide salt and rat and money. Bales rose like cliffs. She struck one match and cupped it, then another, reading stencil marks by Flair. TS for 10 sleep, HC for Hargrove consignment, an M brand she did not know over a scarred older C. Her father's mark had been C open at the jaw, lazy C the neighbors called it, because Ezra said a brand should close gently like a gate you meant to open again. Third bale from the east wall, second row high. She found them. 24 hides baled tight, condemned line chalked and smeared, but under the chalk the old tagging twine still knotted in Ezra's way. Double half hitch, tail left long because his knife hand had shook from fever. Wren cut one tail with her teeth because her fingers were done, pocketed twine and tag, and heard, over the wind, the small bright sound that did not belong. Sleigh bells, far off and coming wrong. Tobin heard it too. Doctor wouldn't bring bells in this. Marlowe would, Wren said, and the warehouse door banged. Not Marlowe, his son. While Marlowe was 19 and beautiful in the way of boys who have never had to be useful, snow-crusted, horseless, bleeding from the temple where a branch or a hoof had introduced him to consequence. Behind him in the white came the bells of a cutter and a horse blown to foam, and behind that, faint as memory, the low thunder of cattle turned too late by fence into coulee, bunching, climbing over one another toward creek ice that would hold a sleigh and not 1,000 pounding hearts. He saw the cut twine in Wren's hand and understood enough to hate her. Thief, he said, and then the earth through the board said otherwise, and fear took the sneer off his face. My father's at the seep. He sent me for riders. They're all at the pens drinking courage. I took Myra's cutter because he swallowed blood. The gap fence. He told me wire holds better than prayer. I laughed. Tobin moved so fast Wren saw only the end of it, while caught by the coat before his knees found the floor. Where's the doctor? Red Butte. Passed out at Myra's, likely. Then ride, Wren said, though the boy was Marlowe's, though his father had called her a winter with legs, though every sensible cruelty in the world said let the powerful reap their fences. Take the cutter west along the river road, not the bend. If the gelding coughs, get off and run. He'll outlast you spiteful. Bring the doctor to Moss Cup, or don't come back to any mother who ever sewed your buttons. Lal stared at her, as if she had spoken in a language men use only when women are not present. Then he ran. The coulee was a throat, and the herd was in it. Wren never afterward remembered deciding to go down. She remembered Tobin's rope burning through her mitten when he tied off to a fence post sunk in frozen ground and left Bishop ground-tied, because mules sometimes obey the part of a man that is praying. She remembered the first steers hitting creek ice and the ice giving with a sound like a giant biting bread. She remembered snow red at the edges where hooves had made mistakes. She remembered Tobin's voice, not loud. Loud was dead in that wind, calling heads and numbers the way her father used to call psalms in a meeting house when the preacher got lost. 2 by the snag, cut left. Easy, easy. Wren, the roan. A roan calf went through near shore and came up blowing, too small to climb. Wren went into the waist before thought could vote. Cold made a fist around her heart and squeezed. She got her arms under the calf and felt its heart hammer against her ribs as if hers were not trying the same trick. Tobin hauled the rope. Ice took her boots. For one bright second she was back under canvas at the Sweetwater with her mother saying, Wren, hush. Listen to the rain, because rain had been mercy then and not this white mouth closing. Hands caught her hood. Not Tobin's. Mirapel's, impossible and swearing. with Enoch the stage driver sober for once and Myra's thimble cutting Wren's cheek as they dragged. Behind them came shapes that resolved into men from ranches that had shut doors. Bar 7's cook with a hayfork, Slater's foreman who had paid an elk, 2 Homestead boys who had hidden from Marlowe's hiring lists all autumn. No speeches, only rope and breath and cattle deciding, because stubborn is contagious, that the hole in the ice was not the whole world. They saved 41 and lost 19, and a black bull whose death made the creek look briefly like ink. They saved Lyle's cutter horse by singing it down, Abel's crooked him coming from Abel himself, because Micah had brought the little ones wrapped in every blanket Moss Cup owned when the fever broke, and Ruth woke asking for the blue cup in a voice so small it made grown men remove their hats in a blizzard. Cress Marlowe arrived when the worst was done, because men who trust fences arrive after gates matter. He stood above the coulee in his beaver coat black with wet, looking at the bodies of his cattle and the living flank of the herd that Tobin had turned with a rope and Wren had turned by knowing a mule hates west wind. His mustache had ice in it. He did not look rich. For one unguarded instant, he looked like a boy who had been told wire was stronger than weather and had believed it because the alternative was believing his father wrong. No one cheered. The storm forbade it. Snow filled the air and the tracks and the mouths of the dead steers. Wren stood shaking so hard the watch chain ticked against her ribs, the cut twine in her pocket frozen to her leg. Tobin came to her with Bishop's saddle blanket and put it over her shoulders without wrapping her, leaving her arms free because he knew she would rather freeze than be held unable. Marlowe's eyes found the twine and dangling from her fist. "Warehouse," he said. "Open now," Tobin answered. "Like your gap." There was the question, sharp as the ice that had taken the bull. Would Marlowe make it a war of papers in a white field with men listening who had eaten polite refusals all autumn? Wren felt the forged line in Hargrove's book, though it was miles away under June's mattress. Felt her father's long-tailed knot against her skin. Felt Ruth's fever break in a blanket that smelled of Elise Hale's cedar box. She could have thrown it then. She could have named him forger before men who needed only a name to become a jury. Instead, she said, "Your son rode for the doctor before he knew whose fever it was." Marlowe blinked. Snow caught on his lashes and made him look briefly old. "He took Myra's cutter," Wren said. "He came back. The debt between your house and mine is not the same as the debt between your fence and those cattle." She opened her hand and let the frozen twine fall into the snow between them. "I'm keeping the tag." That was the restraint Myra spoke of years later at boarding house suppers, not praising, only setting another plate. How Wren Calloway, with proof in her pocket and fever still in her sister's hair, chose not to spend a boy's one good act buying his father's shame. The storm took 2 more days to be done with them. In the quiet after, Moss Cup filled with people the way a lamp fills a room, not by pushing dark out all at once, but by making the dark decide where to stand. Myra moved in with a satchel and ruled the stove. Slater's foreman brought quinine and left before Marlowe could learn his name. The Methodist widow from Omaha wrote 3 letters in 1 week and got back one in June's careful hand saying, "We are not a train." Enoch the driver swore off drink until spring and broke the oath on a Tuesday, but swore better after. Ruth lived. That is the sentence Wren would write in the family Bible years later, though there was no family Bible yet. Only Tobin's with Elise's hand in the margin saying milk before prayer if baby wakes. Ruth lived and was thin as a wish for a month and laughed first at Bishop's ears and then at everything, because children heal unfairly, and it is the only unfairness worth forgiving. On the 18th of December, when the sky scrubbed itself blue and the snow shone hard enough to blind, Tobin saddled the gelding and rode alone to Red Butte with Hargrove's tally book inside his shirt and Ezra's hide tag in the pouch, where tobacco used to live. Wren wanted to go. He told her no in the tone that had once turned steers, not forbidding and trusting. Somebody Marlowe can't call a thief, or a child has to carry it. I can be only one of those on a good day. He came back after lamplight with frost in his beard and no triumph on his face, which frightened her until he took from his coat a stamped paper, a smaller paper, and a bundle of letters tied with string gone soft from many hands. The stamped paper bore the circuit clerk's mark from Laramie, obtained by telegraph, and Myra's cousin who married a telegrapher and never let him forget she had choices. It did not crown anyone. It only said the Calloway note showed dispute. Foreclosure stayed pending spring term. Possession of claim and spring remained with heirs and residents. Any interference with water to be answered in court. Paper, as Marlowe loved, had been taught a truer sentence. The smaller paper was a receipt from the Stock Association warehouse, signed by the Slater foreman as witness, and the cook as witness and Mira as witness because she had bullied her way into men's business with a thimble, acknowledging 24 Calloway hides received October 1888 in good order and held over protest of condemnation added without initials. Not proof enough to hang a man, Marlowe's lawyer would say later. Enough to make hanging unnecessary. The letters were from the 5 ranches that had shut their doors. Not apologies. Wren would have fed apologies to the stove. They burned too fast to heat a room. Offers. Day work for Tobin at fair wage with no whisper list attached. A place for Micah spring branding if Wren said yes, and Micah swore to keep his temper holstered. Mending for Wren at Myra's rate, not charities. A used school bell from the Bar 7 schoolhouse for the claim cabin when spring made one possible. At the bottom of the Bar 7 letter, in the hand of the woman who had shut the 5th door, one line, "My husband counted mouths. I should have counted winters." Wren sat by the stove after the little ones slept and read that line until the words blurred. Tobin mended harness across the table and did not speak. The carved star turned once on its twine and settled. "He'll fight," she said. "Yes." He might still take the note on Moss Cup. "Yes." "We could lose." Tobin drew an awl through leather, slow and sure. "Ezra taught you sign. Elise taught me that grief don't get to drive every wagon. We could lose. It won't be because we made ourselves smaller to fit his coat." Wren folded the Bar 7 letter along its crease and put it in the tin box she had not opened, the one that held Moss Cup's note and Elise's marriage lines and the baby's cap she pretended not to know. Closing the lid felt like closing a hand around something alive. "My mother used to say a door is just a wall that decided to love somebody." Tobin's all stopped. After a moment he said, "That sounds like her. You never met her." "I've met what's left." It was the second line Wren kept, the one she would say to June years later when June's first heartbreak made a boarding house room too small. "A door is just a wall that decided to love somebody." Say it now if you need to. Whisper it to the person asleep in the next room or to the empty chair that still gets set at your table. If this story has found the bruised place and pressed gentle there, let it know you felt it. Tap the like as a small lantern in the window. Subscribe if you want another lamp lit against next week's dark. Not for me. For the part of you that still believes quiet goodness should get to finish its sentence. Spring did not arrive all at once, because spring in that country is a negotiation conducted in mud. The North Platte opened its black hands and gave back ice in slabs that ground at the bends. Cattle counted themselves in ribs and calves. The association met in Red Butte's church because the schoolhouse was too small for the number of men who wanted to look as if they had always been fair. Cress Marlowe came in his beaver coat with the collar turned up and found the room warmer than he had made it. There was no trial in the way stories like a trial, no thunderclap, no rope. There was a table and Hargrove's tally book with whiskey-shiny pages, a hide tag tied in a dead man's nervous knot, a receipt with a boarding house keeper's name bold as a brand, and a line of people who did not make speeches. Slater's foreman said the gap fence at Marlowe's seep was strung against association rule, and he had helped cut it in the storm. The Bar 7 cook said through Myra's translating that his wagon had carried condemned chalk to the warehouse after the hides were already baled. Enoch said he had hauled paper to Laramie and would swear to dates while sober, which he presently was by 4 days. While Marlowe stood last and longest, his temple scar white, and said he had opened a water gap because his father told him wire held better than prayer, and he had learned in a coulee what prayer was for. Cress Marlowe did not beg. Give a proud man that much and no more. He looked at the hides tally until the numbers could have burned, then at Wren in her father's coat cleaned and mended with Myra's black thread, then at Tobin standing by the stove with his hat in his hands. What passed across his face was not repentance in the church sense. It was the slow irrelevance of a man discovering that the room has learned to breathe without his permission. "Association will pay for the dead cattle my fence made," he said at last. "Claims on North Bench water go to committee. Hargrove's estate." His mouth twisted around the dead man's name as if it had once owed him money too. "Can settle without my bank." No one applauded. Myra's thimble clicked once against her cup, and that was the sound of a gavel. Tobin could have risen then. He could have told the room about December doors and polite latches and children counting snowflakes outside windows that would not open. He could have asked for Marlowe's note on Moss Cup to be read aloud, for the room to see how a rope of paper is braided. Wren watched him feel the weight of the words in his hand and choose not to throw them. He set his hat on his head, nodded to Mira as if passing salt, and went out to check the gelding's cough because spring mud breeds colds, and somebody had to keep being the kind of man the story had been about all along. Marlowe left Red Butte before the first buttercups, not ruined, not chased, only smaller in the exact measure that power shrinks when it has to buy back its own mistakes. His bank sold notes east. His son stayed one season and worked for Slater's foreman and sent Tobin a bridal bid at Christmas with no card. The seep on the north bench got a stone trough and a fence with a gate that opened both ways. The first time Wren saw a stranger's cow drink there, she stood guard anyway, hand on the latch, until Abel said from behind her, "Water can't tell brands, Wren." She let the latch go. The claim proved up in June, not the month, though it was June too, and Wren always said the calendar had blushed under a homestead entry with Tobin Hale named as guardian until majority and Wren Calloway named in her own hand on her 18th birthday, when the clerk, new and kind and in love with Myra's niece, told her a woman could file if she was head of family and unmarried and stubborn enough to make the ink behave. Moss Cup's note was paid with Marlowe's cattle money and a summer of Wren's horse doctoring, because word traveled that the Calloway girl could read a limp the way bankers read collateral and did not charge widows when the foal lived. They built a room onto Moss Cup from the schoolhouse bell timber and Myra's boarding house floorboards after a fire she called providential and the fire marshal called wiring. The blue enamel cup got a nail of its own between the carved star and a new shelf June made crooked on purpose because perfection made Ruth sneeze. Micah grew 2 inches in one spring and learned that temper kept is strength remembered. June started a school under the cottonwood when Miss Eddy wrote that Cheyenne had hats, but no children worth half Abel's questions. Abel taught Bishop to come to him sung right and forgave the mule for preferring them wrong. Ruth, 5 going on eternal, decided the carved star was hers to dust and broke it once and glued it with flour paste and tears until Tobin showed her how to peg wood so the break became a line the star had earned. Love, when it came for Wren and Tobin, did not come, as the young magazines said, with thunder and a meadow. It came as tools returned sharper than borrowed, as coffee left hot without comment, as the day Wren set a bone in a mare's pastern and looked up to find Tobin holding the lantern at exactly the height her shoulder needed, and neither of them said for how long they had been practicing that height. It came as the first hard frost of their second autumn, when Mira asked outright at supper whether they intended to make the preacher ride all the way from Laramie for nothing or whether they were going to keep sinning respectable by accident, and Ruth choked on milk laughing because she did not know what sinning meant, but Myra's face was enough. Tobin asked Wren in the lean-to, of course, where the useful things happened, with Bishop breathing warm on his neck and the winter coming honest outside. He did not kneel. Knees were for cattle work and prayer, and he said he had used up his allotment of both for one lifetime and been given extra anyway. He held out not a ring but a Lisa's blue thread, saved in the baby cap's hem, and Wren understood that he was offering her not replacement but continuation, a stitch drawn through what had torn so the cloth could carry weight again. "I am not whole," he said, which was as close as that man came to poetry before coffee. "Neither is bread before it rises," Wren answered, and Mira, eavesdropping with the discretion of a freight train, dropped a pan in the kitchen and pretended the cat did it. They married in the schoolroom when the bell timber was still a doorframe and not yet a wall, with every ranch represented except Marlowe's and several people there who had once said no learning to say yes in a voice they could use later at home. The preacher from Laramie got snowed in and married them by lantern with wet boots. June read Ruth a psalm because Ruth liked the part about valleys and kept shouting deeper at the wrong places. Micah gave Wren away and then objected to the phrase so fiercely the preacher amended it to Wren, giving herself with Micah, standing nearby in case of weather. Abel sang the hymn right and Bishop outside sang it wrong, and if there was a dry eye in Red Butte that night it belonged to a man too proud to fetch water. Years do in stories what rivers do in canyons. Take away what looks solid and reveal the shape that was waiting underneath. The Calloway claim grew a real house around Moss Cup and kept the sod wall inside the kitchen because Wren said walls that have held off wind deserve to stay near the bread. Red Butte got a depot when the spur came and discovered that progress smells of creosote and charges freight. Cress Marlowe died in Denver of a heart that had spent so long being right it forgot how to rest. His obituary called him a cattle king and did not mention the seep, which Wren said was fair, because men should be buried by their best enemies with some truths left standing like fence posts after fire. Tobin went gray beautifully, as Mira put it, like a rope that had found its load. He never did learn to knock before entering a room where Ruth was crying, and Ruth never learned to mind. The carved star gathered more twine, more dust, more small fingers. On winter nights when the wire sang and the stove ticked, Wren would take down the blue cup and make milk hot with honey, and whichever child was home. Later, whichever grandchild had ridden in from a farther ranch with a heart cracked by love or debt, would drink and be told, not as lesson, only as weather. The world will turn you away gently and call it wisdom. Go find the door with smoke in the chimney and knock till your knuckles learn their worth. If you ask whether every wound closed, the answer is no, and any story that says otherwise is selling something. Abel dreamed of creek ice some nights and woke singing. Micah lost a thumb joint to a green bronc and named the scar Marlowe so he could forgive it daily. June married the telegrapher's cousin and buried him in flu year and came home with his key and a daughter who looked so much like Mira that Mira accused God of copying. Wren and Tobin lost a baby between Elise's cap and Ruth's first loose tooth, and for a winter the blue cup stayed empty on its nail until Ruth, 9 then and ferocious, filled it with snowmelt and set it by Tobin's plate and said, "Drink, old man. Grief gets thirsty too." He drank. The cup stayed in use after that, chip and all, because things that have held emptiness hold milk better. The last time Cress Marlowe's name mattered in the valley was a spring committee meeting when water ran low and a young cattleman from Cheyenne with new boots and old arrogance suggested locking the North Bench gate until big outfits drank first. He used the word efficiency. He used the word unavoidable. Wren, 50 by then and faster with a gate latch than men half her age, let him finish. Then she told the story of 5 children and 6 doors and 1 raw pine door with a horseshoe points down, told it plain, without names that needed shaming and with every name that needed honoring, until the room remembered what kind of place it had chosen to become. The gate stayed open. The young man's boots got muddy. He learned, boots being teachers too. And so we come to the evening I want to leave with you, the one I see when I close my own eyes after the house has gone quiet. It is years on from the storm, and the bench above the North Platte is green in that brief Wyoming way that makes you believe green was the first color and all others were practice. Wren stands at the spring trough with her hair gone the color of snow at dusk, one hand on the gate she no longer guards, listening to a granddaughter in the house argue with June about whether bread rises better near a window or near a heart. Tobin is on the porch with the carved star in his palm, teaching a boy with Abel's eyes how to peg a break so it becomes part of the grain. Ruth's laugh comes from the lean-to where Bishop III, stubborn as theology, has stolen her hat. The blue cup hangs by the door, chipped, washed ready. The camera of the mind pulls back then. One spring running clean through a gate that opens both ways. 5 names grown into a valley that once would not feed them. Smoke rising straight for a moment before the wind takes it gently. And the last thing Wren says before she goes into supper is not a speech and not a prayer. Only the truth she has been living since the 5th door clicked shut. A family isn't who lets you in. It's who keeps the fire lit till you find the latch. Next time, I'll tell you about the widowed dressmaker in a railroad town who was paid to sew a wedding gown for the woman marrying the man she loved, and how the stitch she hid in the hem outlived the marriage, the railroad, and every lie told in that parlor. Until then, keep your lamp in the window and your door a little less afraid of the dark. Good night, friends. I'm glad you were here.